All right. Welcome everyone to our sustainable purchasing information session. Let's start with some introductions. My name is Samara Reich Thomas. I am the training program manager with King County's centralized procurement and payables team. I'll be facilitating our session this morning. Karen, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, good morning. My name is Karen Hamilton. I'm the Sustainable Purchasing Program Manager. I work here in procurement and payables along with Samara, and I'm here to talk about the policy updates and how we can be a resource for you.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for being here with us this morning, Karen. Folks, Karen really is a subject matter expert today, and we want to make sure that your questions get answered. So please use the Q&A to let us know at any time if you've got any questions, and I'll bring those questions to Karen's attention as you ask them in the Q&A. Folks, we like to introduce ourselves with our cameras on so that you can put our names and our faces together. However, we also want to stay connected throughout the entire session today. So Karen and I are going to go ahead and turn our cameras off right now. We will turn them back on toward the end of today's session for our final Q&A and farewell, and just really appreciate your understanding on that. Now, before we jump into the presentation, I'd like to go through just a couple of functions of the Zoom webinar platform that we'll be using today. First, for those of you who've just joined us, today's session is being recorded. All attendees today are muted and are not able to share video. So if you don't see that video on/off button, don't worry, that's how it's supposed to be. Currently, you should be able to hear me and see a presentation on your screen. At the bottom of your screen, you'll have a Zoom toolbar, similar to that featured here in the presentation materials. On your Zoom toolbar, you'll see a raise hand feature, a Q&A feature, and a chat feature. We're going to use the raise hand feature later in today's session, so I'm going to invite you now to look at your Zoom toolbar, find that raise hand button, go ahead and raise your hand. Let's make sure that's working for everyone this morning. I see hands are going up. That's great. Thanks so much. Awesome. Go ahead and click those hands down. Thank you. All right. On the Zoom toolbar, you do have a chat feature. The chat feature today is disabled. You will not be able to use the chat feature to type in comments. I will send out a link in the chat feature later today, but that will be the only use for that feature throughout today's session. As we go through the presentation, and if you have any comments or questions for us, please use the Q&A to ask those questions. We will review your questions and answer them at the end of each section this morning. You can also open that Q&A to see questions from other attendees, as well as the answer if we type any responses to those questions. You can also upvote those questions. So if somebody else asks something that you're really interested in, you can upvote that and communicate to us. We'll also be issuing various polls throughout the presentation today. Both the Q&A and the poll features open as pop-up windows on your screen that you can minimize and move around if they open in an odd spot on your screen. And closed captions are enabled today for those who may benefit from them. You can turn on the closed captions using the Show Captions button on your Zoom toolbar. I have two more business items here before we jump into our agenda. We do ask that you take a few moments at the end of today's session to provide us your feedback. There will be an anonymous evaluation that opens automatically in your browser when you leave the webinar session. This anonymous evaluation helps us to gauge how you like the content and the online format of the session, and really does help us to improve future trainings that we offer, especially as we continue to build more of our content for the virtual format. And finally, I will be sending out a follow-up email. We will be sending out a follow-up email after today's session. It's very likely that that email will be sent to you early next week. It will include the slides that we reviewed together today, a link to the recording, as well as website links and additional resources. So with all that said, let's do our first poll today. Karen and I have introduced ourselves. Now we want to get to know just a little bit more about the folks who are here with us today. And so I've just launched our first poll, which asks the question, what types of purchases are you most interested in learning about today? And you should have 5 answer choices. Now, if I remember correctly, there may be a submit button after you respond to the poll. You may have to click submit for that answer to actually be recorded for us. We're waiting on just a handful of folks to respond to the poll. We'll give you a few more seconds. Going once, going twice. We'll end this poll here. I'm going to go ahead and share out these results. So Karen, like our previous session, it looks like really the majority of folks are here today to learn about those direct buys and small purchases, the purchase of goods and services. We have a handful of folks who are interested in information technology and architecture and engineering. And then today we have more folks who are interested in learning about construction than we did in our previous session. So folks, thanks so much for that input. We'll sort of keep that in mind, and particularly it helps us to sort of know what types of questions y'all might have for us. So appreciate your participation there. Here's a look at today's agenda. We will be together for an hour today, and during that time, we will talk about the history of sustainable purchasing here in King County. Then we'll dig into some key policy updates that happened at the end of 2023 at a high level, and then we'll really dig into those policy requirements and recommendations. We'll wrap things up today by taking a look at some of the tools and resources to support King County agencies with sustainable purchasing. So with that, let's jump into things, and we will start with a history of sustainable purchasing here in King County. So Karen, I'll hand it over to you now.
Thanks, Samara. So I wanted to start with just level setting what we mean by sustainability. We often use words like green or environmentally preferable to talk about product attributes and actions, but this mainly touches on the environmental part of sustainability. So where we're meeting all of these things together is called sustainability. So sustainable purchasing means procuring goods and services in a manner that integrates fiscal responsibility, social equity, and environmental stewardship. King County has a long history of buying products based on their environmental criteria, starting in 1989 with just recycled content products. This was based on the US EPA's comprehensive procurement guidelines. We were collecting a lot of recyclables, and manufacturers were starting to turn them into products. And so the US government set some minimum recycled content guidelines for jurisdictions to follow in the federal government. This was very useful at the beginning and helped launch King County's program. And after a few years, we learned a lot more about how to source these products. And really, we started getting questions on products that have a lesser reduced effect on human health and the environment. And this is when we started seeing multiple attributes of products that we wanted to investigate. And so we rebranded as environmentally preferable. And again, we had a lot of resources from the US government. Over the intervening years, we've had a lot of sustainability initiatives. If you've been around for a few years, you've probably heard about our green building, energy plan, strategic climate action plan. There's a lot that we're trying to do to focus on sustainability. And so in 2018, our program rebranded to Sustainable Purchasing. And again, that's really trying to bring together all those elements of environmental, social, and fiscal aspects of procurement. So some of the drivers for this is we buy a lot of things. We spend a lot of money as a government, and we want to be as responsible as possible. And in the right-hand side, you can see that we're starting to realize our climate impact of our decisions. So purchasing data has been fed through something called an economic input-output model. And we were able to translate that into greenhouse gas emissions associated with these products and services. And it shifts our focus a little bit on thinking not just about the purchase price, but where a lot of these emissions come from and how we can source different products to reduce our impact on the environment. The Strategic Climate Action Plan is a countywide plan that addresses the county's greenhouse gas emissions. It's a 5-year blueprint that lays out goals, targets, measures, and priority actions on how the county plans to achieve this reduction, as well as mitigating the changes that we can't control. Purchasing is thread throughout, and we can't meet all of our goals if we don't address what we buy. So there are several purchasing priorities that are embedded in this plan in the different focus areas that we have on reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. So for instance, we can't meet our green building goals without buying sustainable materials. We can't meet our energy goals without buying LED lamps, etc. So why are there so many greenhouse gas emissions from purchasing? We need to look at the whole life cycle of the product to understand, really thinking about where did it come from, how long will we use it for, and what will we do with it at the end of life. So a good example to start with is something as simple as copy paper that we all use. It's expensive to cut down trees and extract those raw materials. Takes a lot of energy to transport to a mill for pulping the wood, very energy intensive. And then it's packaged and shipped long distances. And our purchase and use is only a small part of what most people think about. We're very, fixated, of course, on cost and use. And some of the other things to think about is the end of life. Can we recycle it at the end of life so that it can become a new feedstock and really tie into this circularity that we can reuse items as much as possible? Some other relevant policies that address sustainable material requirements, especially if you do work in capital projects, which there was an interest here, is the county has a green building ordinance that requires the use of many sustainable materials. If you're using some of the certifications for buildings or infrastructure projects, or just using the county's sustainable infrastructure scorecard, you can get points for using these sustainable materials. So there's a lot that can be done within these capital contracts to reduce our impact on the environment. We also have a compost use ordinance. The PMP has a universal contract that anyone can use right now for maintenance projects that has compost procured that has yard waste or biosolids feedstock in it. And for capital projects, there's a lot of requirements around using compost as a soil amendment to prevent erosion, and then reporting on its use. And this comes from a state requirement as well, that we want to help keep those markets healthy and we get a good product in the end.
Erin, thank you so much for this foundational information about the history of sustainable purchasing here in King County. Let's pause for just a moment and invite questions that folks might have at this point before we really dig into King County's sustainable purchasing policy. Folks, just as a reminder, and for those of you who've just joined us, the chat is disabled for today's session, so please feel free to open up that Q&A. And as I mentioned, let's take advantage of Karen's expertise and make sure your questions get answered during our session today. So we'll just pause for a few seconds here in case anyone's typing a question into that Q&A for us. All right, Karen, I'm not seeing any questions, so I think in the interest of time, we'll just continue forward. Folks, our next section, we're going to invite Karen to provide us some high-level information about the 2023 Sustainable Purchasing Policy updates.
Thanks, Samara. So the county takes a three-pronged approach to sustainable procurement. And the first is an ordinance. This is the high-level intent or legislation. So this was adopted by the county council and codified as King County Code 18.20. And this really sets the tone for adopting federal guidance and tools, authorizing the use of environmental standards and certifications or eco-labels, which I'll talk about later, and really gives us a foundational intent of what we mean by sustainable purchasing. We also have an executive policy, and this is what we're really highlighting today. It was updated at the end of last year in 2023, and it is the best way to translate what we mean in all the legislation to actionable items, so requirements and responsibilities of county agencies to buy sustainable materials. We also have an implementation guidance, which is called the Sustainable Purchasing Guide. So the policy is the foundation, but to help guide internal decision-making, we've provided purchasing recommendations and approved standards and certifications for sustainable products and services. And this is more flexible and easier to update. And I will talk in detail about that as well as a resource. So what stayed the same in policy? Most of the definitions of what we mean by sustainable purchasing. So I've already mentioned that includes the fiscal, social, and environmental aspects of procurement, but we're also talking about while protecting public health and the environment over the whole life cycle, from the extraction of raw materials until the final disposal. The agency roles and responsibilities have mainly stayed the same, asking you to consider in your initial needs assessment for all product and service procurements to think through some of these sustainability requirements. The purchasing guide is that online resource for policy requirements and lists any sustainable or green contracts that we have available, broken down by commodity. And then the authorization of the use of environmental standards and certifications or eco-labels, which are recommended by the US EPA and adopted in our policy. So what looks different about the 2023 executive policy update is that we're taking a more proactive approach to sustainable purchasing, trying to include more requirements versus recommendations. I know this is a very tricky one to, just tell me what it is you want me to buy, but it's a very complicated, in-depth process sometimes. So we're trying to distill it down as much as possible for you to include steps in your procurement planning process to meet the directives in this policy. Another change is that the policy is addressing PFAS, a chemical of concern. So minimizing the purchase of products containing toxic chemicals, especially PFAS, with a goal of phasing out all usage of products containing such chemicals where we can. This policy also aligns more closely with recently updated sustainability policies. So in the last 5 years since the last update, we've had the 2020 Strategic Climate Action Plan, an updated green building ordinance, compost use, pro-equity contracting, as well as Washington state requirements for products such as compost, recycled aggregates, packaging, and PFAS. The last thing that the policy does is create a sustainable purchasing committee of subject matter experts and end users from throughout the county for program planning purposes and future sustainable policy and purchasing guide enhancements. And this is currently being formulated, will launch this summer, and it is mainly a volunteer led group with procurement and payables leading this effort.
Karen, thank you Oh, I'm sorry, I cut you off.
No, I was just going to say, I think we're pausing for questions.
Yeah, let's pause here, folks, for questions. Karen, we did get a question. You mentioned we have 2 questions for you here in the Q&A. So our first question came in right after you started on this section. So it's actually referring to something you mentioned in the history of sustainable purchasing in King County section of the training. So Robin is asking about the points that you mentioned when you were referencing the green building ordinance and the compost ordinance. So can you go back to that piece and give a little bit more information on how folks like get those points?
Yes, thank you. So I'll try to make this quick and high level, but essentially in the scorecard for green building projects, you can get points for different things that you do if you can save energy, water, account for greenhouse gas emissions. And one of the sections is for sustainable materials. So if you use bio-based and recycled products, you'll get additional points, which will award you a higher level of compliance. So you can get a platinum rating, which is the highest that we're striving for. So the more you're able to accomplish in those projects, the more points that you get.
Awesome. Thanks for breaking that down. I know it's kind of a big topic and you've just given sort of a short answer to it. Robin, hopefully that makes sense to you and answers your question, but if you've got any additional follow-up on that, go ahead and let us know in the Q&A. Awesome. Karen, the other question that we have here is from James, and I think this came up as you were talking about PFAS. So James says, were you talking about the 6 PPD chemicals on tires? And again, I think that this was related to PFAS, but I'm not 100% sure.
And I don't have a great answer for that. I think it might cover that, but I'd have to talk with you about that offline.
Okay. Thanks, James. I think we'll wanna connect after the session to make sure that we can answer your question on that. Great. Thanks so much, James. All right. I don't see any other questions in, but folks, if you've got questions about King County's policy approach to sustainability, go ahead and get those questions in the Q&A and we'll certainly be sure to answer them. But in the interest of time, let's go ahead and continue forward now. And Karen, we're going to hand it right back to you to really dig into some of these policy updates that you've mentioned for us at a high level.
Thanks, Samara. So agencies have responsibilities to review the policy's sustainability directives and evaluate and prioritize the environmental, social, and fiscal benefits of purchasing decisions. It also requires you to consider total cost where possible. So thinking through that product life cycle, you know, buying an electric car is more expensive up front, but you do save on gas and maintenance. And, you know, we do this for already in the county for big purchases. We have to do something called like a return on investment. So if we're going to be spending more money up front, we want to know that there's a return on that value. But you can also use these simply through just smaller purchases, thinking about, can I buy something that's more durable and lasts longer so I'm not wasting money? The other thing that the policy requires is to evaluate the use of available environmental standards and certifications, or eco-labels. This is the easiest way to identify sustainable products. And again, I will speak to you more in depth about what those are and how best to use them. The other thing the policy addresses is reducing overall consumption and waste. So trying to think about reuse, take back programs, circularity, like I mentioned recycled content where we can recycle things and buy them back. And the other main thing is to refer to procurement sustainable purchasing guide for what these minimum requirements are. So the policy requirements give agencies the roadmap for environmental, social, and fiscal, but there are some specific directives to follow. So the guide is the best way to consult what those requirements are, because some of them do come from separate policies, such as the SCAP, green building, or from EPA's recommended eco labels. So the sustainable purchasing guide is a way to help with that policy implementation, be used as a tool to help you know what those rules are, and it's organized by commodities. So I've used these different consideration words quite a bit, but I just wanted to dig into what we mean when we're talking about environmental, social, and fiscal. So buying products that are better for human health and the environment. Can we buy better products from more sustainable companies? And so some of the environmental aspects being things like recycled content, resource efficient, those that are energy or water saving, more durable or repairable, have low greenhouse gas emissions associated with their initial purchase. We're also thinking about those small businesses or minority and women-owned businesses that we can buy from, and human rights implications for buying from companies that ensure these regulations. And then fiscally, just being a good value and being responsible for reducing our consumption, accounting for all costs, and leveraging buying power. Sometimes we can do that through using contracts from the state and other national cooperatives. So when I talk about the fiscal aspect of sustainability, the policy requires you to take into account the life cycle of products and determine a cost savings. So this is just to remind us that the purchase price, although very important for our bottom line, is only part of the cost. So again, if you're buying something like LED light bulbs for work or for your house, the initial purchase price is going to be higher. They're more expensive technology, but it saves a lot of electricity. They last longer, and then they're not a hazardous waste at the end of life. You don't have to take them to a hazardous waste facility such as fluorescent lamps. So there's just ways to think about, okay, can I buy something that's going to be more durable and used for longer, and this will actually save you money and time. The other thing that the policy does is it talks about some operational requirements. Sustainable purchasing isn't just about what you buy, but what strategies you can use to reduce consumption. And this is supported by those other policies as well, such as the SCAP. Can we purchase goods and services and materials that are durable, minimize packaging, have take-back programs, are recycled or salvaged, and account for those life cycle costs? So there's several things listed in our policies to reduce our consumption in the first place. So raise your hand if you've heard the term PFAS before. Okay, I'm seeing a few hands. It's come up in the news quite a bit lately, and this is something that has been addressed in policy. So PFAS is a chemical of concern that's intentionally designed not to break down naturally. This is why they're also known as forever chemicals, since they can last for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And more is becoming known about these toxic chemicals. Regulators are working on phasing out PFAS at its source, but there are things that we can do when buying products to eliminate them as much as possible. The policy requires you to avoid the purchase of products containing intentionally added PFAS unless there's no feasible alternative. And King County has required vendors to disclose and eliminate these chemicals in several categories so far, including firefighting foam, janitorial cleaners, carpet, and furniture. We worked with the state recently on green cleaners and required all products on contract to validate this. And there's a lot more work to do in this category. We're still learning what products contain PFAS and how to eliminate them. So look to the contracts that we do have available that eliminate this chemical, and we will be working with you on more and more as these are identified. So one of the simplest ways to buy products and be assured that they are sustainable is to use eco labels, eco being short for environmental. So these standards and certifications have done the work for us, and we can look for the eco label to identify them. So say when you go to buy an appliance, you notice an Energy Star label. This shows you how much energy the appliance will use on an annual basis. So it can help in your decision making to know that you're going to use less energy. So again, thinking about some of the life cycle implications of buying an appliance that you're going to use for years, you want to be as energy efficient as possible. We've used several of these in bid documents and our procurements, and we're learning a lot more about multiple attribute ones. So some of these will address the life cycle of products to help us identify those that perform and are have less impact on human health and the environment. These are often accredited through national and international organizations to help with those standards and certifications being done by third party, which make them more transparent and accessible. So King County has adopted these EPA recommendations outright in our policy. We often look to state and federal guidance on this subject, and the US EPA went through a public process to recommend third-party standards and certifications outside of their influence. And they are mandated to use these at the federal acquisition level. So this was a great update for our 2018 policy legislation update, as well as our 2023, that we have a roadmap for approved eco labels that we can use. So this public process went through and highlighted the best of the best in these categories that gives us assurance of what we're buying is sustainable. The one additional item is that the eco labels are starting to address PFAS. So the EPA again went through and identified those eco labels that address PFAS, and they're going through another revision to update and expand their recommendations to cover more categories. So this can help in an initial reduction. So if you were going to buy something, buy some furniture, there's a level certification that is recommended by the EPA, and it also addresses PFAS in manufacturing of products. So that's one way for us to help it. Now, help identify PFAS reduction. Now, there's only a few eco labels that cover this right now. So we're looking forward to more work being done on that level to address PFAS. It's important for us to use what I call third-party certified eco labels because it validates and audits against the standard. Many claims mislead shoppers by making unclear or false claims about the impacts of their product or company. It's often called greenwashing. So not all eco labels are created equal. So if you see something that says, natural, it doesn't really mean anything unless it's validated. It's a claim that manufacturers make, and there are federal trade guidelines against it. But we often see that it's easy to say that things are green without validating it. So that's why eco labels are our best defense from institutional buyers in order to buy the most sustainable products. So some of the things that you can do is to think through the process. Can you assess the need, avoid purchases, or repurpose something instead of buying new? King County has a surplus section that we can get free items secondhand. FMD has a furniture pilot. No need to buy certain desks and chairs if you can get them through surplus or FMD. Then search for existing green contracts. Use the awarded contract log or the sustainable purchasing guide, and I'll show you those tools here today. We've already done some of this work and created universal contracts for everyone's use, so we try to highlight those as much as possible. If you don't have a contract or you're have those smaller dollar purchases, we're asking you to think green. Can we piggyback off another contract? Can you refer to the sustainable purchasing guide that has some guidance around things to look for and avoid and end of life considerations, or those other policy strategies about reducing packaging or buying in bulk, ways that we can reduce our impact on the environment. We also look to equity and social justice. We have pro-equity SES certification, minority and women-owned businesses, and businesses that have green certification. So there's a way to meet some of those equity requirements. And then lastly, thinking about end-of-life considerations. Can we recycle things? Can we buy something that's not hazardous waste? Can we take advantage of take-back programs through our distributors and manufacturers that we use so that we're prolonging the life of items, or even sending it back through surplus so that once your agency is done with it, maybe someone else can use it and give it a little bit longer life.
Karen, thank you so much for really providing us this in-depth information about the policy requirements and recommendations. Let's pause here, folks, for any Q&A. We'll invite questions at this time in the Q&A. I don't see any open right now, so I am just going to pause in case anyone is typing in a question about these policy requirements and recommendations before we really talk about resources. We have a quiet group this morning. Oh, here we go. We have a question from Elizabeth, and it's actually more of a comment. So Elizabeth says, more than half the time when we are purchasing, we don't see any labels because we're just going by what the vendor has written on the quote. So are we supposed to be asking, Karen, the supplier questions about whether or not these items are environmentally friendly? And I know we'll touch just a little bit on this later, but Karen, can you provide a little bit of guidance on this?
Yes, please do ask. There's several times where we know we're asking for a sustainable product, such as, recycled content paper or a green cleaner, but it's nice to have it validated even with those small purchases. So if it's something that the vendor can claim that, oh, yes, it's a Green Seal certified product, then that helps make the case. So as much as you can do to specify a green product and then get the vendor to say yes, or maybe there's a way that they can offer an alternative.
Great. Thanks so much for those recommendations, Karen. And then we do have a question from Mary Ann asking if we can provide more information about the surplus from FMD. So Karen, I'll make note of that for our follow-up email.
Yes, definitely. It's a free resource and there are links available we will follow up with.
Perfect, thanks. Mary Ann, I'm gonna go ahead and leave that comment open until I have an opportunity to actually make note of that so I don't lose it, but appreciate that. All right, so folks, we are going to next talk about some resources that are available to support King County agencies with sustainable purchasing. I'm going to go ahead and drop a link in chat for you so that if you want to follow along with some of these resources, you're able to do so. And I'm also going to launch another poll here. We'd love to know. I know, Karen, you've mentioned our sustainable purchasing guide a couple of times today, but would like to find out from folks who are here before today's session, had you heard of the Sustainable Purchasing Guide, and have you used the Sustainable Purchasing Guide in the past? Karen's, of course, mentioned a couple of times today that it really helps with implementing this policy. So we'll give folks a few more seconds to respond to the poll. We're waiting on about half of our participants to respond. Going once, going twice. We'll end the poll here. So Karen, just like our other session, we're at about 50-50 on familiarity or having heard of the Sustainable Purchasing Guide. About half of our participants have heard of it, and for about half of the folks, it is a brand new resource. And we have just a handful of folks, about 10% of our attendees today have used the Sustainable Purchasing Guide. So it sounds like some folks are here and aware of it, but have not actually used it in the past. Thanks so much, folks, for providing us that feedback. Karen, I'm going to hand it to you now to really tell folks about this resource.
Thank you. That's good information to have as we talk about the implementation guide. So it is an online resource for you to use. It highlights 25 different commodity categories. So we're really highlighting those that have eco labels or contracts associated with it that can help you find sustainable products. It's not going to cover everything, but we do our best to be able to outline the things to think about through those choices, and then highlights eco labels and specifications, links to contracts and other resources. Specifically, each commodity page is outlined the same. Next slide, please, Samara. It serves, the outline will have an introduction about the product category. Here is highlighted janitorial products. There's a list of policy requirements and goals. So those are anything associated that are in the sustainable purchasing policy or other sustainability policy at the county level. There's a section on choose, avoid, and end of life considerations. So again, thinking through some of those things that are more durable or recyclable at end of life. The other things that are highlighted are any eco labels associated with that product category. So it will highlight every eco label associated with it, those that are EPA recommended, and they're all county recommended. It'll highlight contracts with sustainable elements. So if we have anything that we've already done work on, you'll be able to find those contracts embedded within the guide. and then additional resources for more information. If you're already used to using procurement payables awarded contract log, then you can search there for what we deem as green contracts. Every Monday, all new contracts are loaded into this log. They're reviewed and marked green where applicable. So we include details under the comment section about what sustainable features make the contract green. And then we categorize. The category column helps us embed it into the sustainable purchasing guide. So that's the best way for us to update those on a weekly basis and be able to highlight which contracts are available for your use. If you interact with the e-procurement system or Oracle, you will see sustainability tabs that relate to the policy requirements. This is a reminder to evaluate those sustainable elements and references you back to the guide. And asks you to include specifications for those where relevant. And this is true for goods and services and capital projects. For those capital construction, A&E and construction contracts, it will focus a little more on the green building ordinance, sustainable purchasing requirements, and refer you back to the guide and policy as well. An additional tool worth mentioning if you're looking for actual products and want to see their certification documents. This is great for those small purchases, or if you need doing a remodel and need very information how you're going to meet the sustainable infrastructure requirements in green building. All of the federally approved certifications are listed here. That means you don't have to go to the individual certification bodies to find particular products. So, for example, if you want to buy a chair, this site would have all the information related to that product, including in all of the environmental criteria and documentation. And it's going to highlight those that address PFAS considerations as well. King County is a national leader in sustainability and a founding member of the Sustainable Purchasing Leadership Council. It's a public-private partnership with members from cities, counties, states, universities to Fortune 500 companies like Microsoft, FedEx, and Office Depot. You are a member because the county is a member, and there's many resources available, such as webinars and newsletters and a community forum. I participate actively in this group because I can network with other jurisdictions and we can talk about great specifications we've used or challenges that we've had, and it's a good way to share information nationally. So we will add all of you as attendees to the membership list, so you'll receive an invitation to take advantage of these benefits at no additional cost to you.
Erin, thank you so much for highlighting these resources for folks. Folks, if you have questions about the resources that Karen just shared with us, please get those questions in the Q&A. And while we wait for questions to come up in the Q&A, we're actually going to do our final poll for today's session. We'd love some feedback from all of you to help think through sort of next steps around trainings and resources that may be helpful. So I'm launching a 3-question poll now. We'd really appreciate some feedback from you around what commodities you'd appreciate additional resources on, what topics from today's session that you'd like more information or training about. And then our third question is, what types of trainings and resources would you prefer? So sort of what delivery method works best for you. So we definitely appreciate some responses on these questions. Folks, for all 3 questions, I do have an other option. And if you select that other option, I'm going to ask that you please open up that Q&A and let us know what it is you're thinking. About a third of our participants have responded, so we'll definitely give folks some more time to respond to this poll. All right, going once, going twice. I'm going to go ahead and end this poll here. This is some really great feedback, Karen, like we saw earlier this week. There's definitely some interest in all of the commodity categories that are on our radar. I don't see any others selected, so folks really appreciate that feedback. Looks like office supplies, just like last time, is the highest scored there, or the highest percentage. Looking at topics, I think it's interesting, you know, most folks selected policy requirements, those sustainability considerations, and that sustainable purchasing guide. So definitely recognize some additional resources there would be helpful. And just like we saw in our other session, folks, I'm seeing as far as, you know, how you want to receive these trainings and resources, on-demand training would be really appreciated, as well as more around these searchable databases like the awarded contracts log and sustainable purchasing guide. So really appreciate everyone's feedback on that. I don't see any questions in the Q&A, so let's go ahead and hand it back to Karen. I know we want to wrap up by highlighting some accomplishments that King County has achieved around sustainable purchasing over the last few years.
Thanks, Samara. And since King County has been doing this for 35 years in some form, we've been a leader in many of these and won many awards in the process. So, you know, we probably have seen the highlights. We take a lot of pride in being the first to buy battery powered buses and, you know, hybrid electric vehicles. There's a lot we're doing in transportation. In our operations, we're buying longer life products and recycled products and doing quite a bit in all of these areas. And for those who are interested in office supplies, when we do a contract, the contract we have it with Keeney's, we ask them to highlight any of those eco-label products that are available and have those show up first in our online ordering. So there's things that we can do in the contracting process to highlight those products to make it easier for you to find, because we realize that some of these have, especially if we're talking about a Grainger for maintenance supplies, we're talking about thousands and thousands of items, and it's hard to be an expert. So there's plenty of ways that we can work with our contractors to highlight those products and make them the most available. And we're doing well. So thank you for all of that. Some of specific examples is the switch to green cleaners products and protocols made a significant impact on our facilities. A long time ago, we switched to buying concentrated products that are diluted to application. This saves money, and it's better for human health and the environment because we're using them properly. Using microfiber cloths and demonstrating proper cleaning techniques. We have a contract specialist right now in procurement and payables who's working on getting all green janitorial contracts in place for our agencies. We worked with the state of Washington to line our requirements, and they have been awarded to companies that are going to supply us with all green, meaning they meet those eco labels and minimum requirements, address PFAS, and are cost effective. So we have 2 contracts in place right now with more to come. So this is a really good example of that. Another good example of sustainable purchasing is our electronics that we buy. If you think about the laptops that are issued to county agencies, these meet something called EPEAT criteria. We won an award for this as well for buying laptops and copiers and cell phones that have an EPEAT certification. And the laptops that we buy were 70% gold rated. So it's a gold, silver, bronze type rating for the environmental criteria. We also lease our products, which means that the 4-year life cycle, the laptops go back and are refurbished for additional use. And so the county never owns them. So that's a way for us to be more environmentally sustainable. This is one of the take back programs that we have to keep things in use for longer. And then those products that electronics that aren't part of that take back program should be recycled through an e-Steward certified company, and we have a contract with one to recycle responsibly. And last year we recycled 110,000 pounds through that program. So one of the last purchasing strategies, which I had mentioned, is that there's ways to combine things. So for some of our remodels, we've repurposed items. So getting, items through surplus and getting them reused as much as possible. And then when you go to buy those new products, using the eco labels associated with it to buy the furniture and flooring is a way to mix those strategies together and do sustainable purchasing. And finally, just thank you so much for taking this time with me. We'll really think about your feedback and be able to give more resources as much as possible. Tamara?
Thanks, Karen. We have just a couple of minutes. So folks, if you have any outstanding questions for Karen, let's go ahead and get them in the Q&A, since we do have just a couple minutes before our scheduled stop time. Karen, thank you so much for this great information. It's good to know that, we're on the right track with this work, and really that King County in many ways is kind of leading the way and a driving force in the government sector toward, sustainable purchasing. And really appreciate, Karen, you sharing these strategies and resources with folks. To all of our attendees, I want to take just a moment and say thank you all so much for carving time out of your busy schedules to join us this morning. We do really appreciate any feedback that you have for us on today's session. So just a friendly reminder that when the webinar ends, you'll automatically have a browser window, a survey will open in your browser. It is anonymous, and we really do appreciate you taking just a moment to tell us about your experience with us this morning. Like Karen said, we'll certainly take your feedback on, training and resource next steps into consideration and put a plan in place for next steps for our team moving forward. And really just want to extend gratitude to everyone for this effort. Karen, do you have any final words for folks?
Just again to thank you. You guys are all part of this process, and anything that procurement and payables can do to support you, we are here as a resource.
Thank you. And we will send a follow-up email to all attendees with additional links and resources. I do see from Sharon in Q&A a request that just came through for additional information about PFAS. So just like the other one that we had come in earlier, I'll make note of that so that we can share some of those resources as well in the follow-up. All right, folks, thank you all for joining us this afternoon or this morning. Hope you have a great rest of your day. Enjoy the sunshine here in Seattle, and we look forward to supporting you in this effort moving forward.